Hey listeners, thank you so much for listening to HRN. We want to make your experience as a listener even better, and to help us do that, we'd love your input on our audience survey. It'll only take a few minutes, and by completing it, you can enter to win a $250 gift card from Goldbelly. Visit heritageradionetwork.org/survey to take the survey and to help us keep growing and improving. That's heritageradionetwork.org/survey. Thanks for your support.
Westholme is working with the land to create nature-led Australian Wagyu. Westholme believes that when nature leads, flavor follows. Learn more at westholme.com.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
Hey, welcome to Beer Sessions Radio on Heritage Radio Network. I'm Jimmy Carboni. I'm the host. It's our 15th year, and today is Tuesday, October 8th, 2024. We're recording another Malt-themed show, and let's go around the room and have all the guests introduce themselves. We'll start with Ron, then Tim, then Josh.
I'm Ron Soberstein, co-founder and director of sales over at Admiral Maltings.
I'm Tim Decker, Sales and Marketing Manager at Admiral Maltings in Alameda, California.
And I'm Josh Wurzbacher, North American Technical Sales Manager for Chris Malt, based out of Philly.
So for many of the listeners, we've done quite a few craft malt and malt and ingredient shows over the past few years. And one of my favorite groups is interacting with the Craft Maltsters Guild and some of the different malt folk who are involved in that. And there's nothing like, getting a fresh tomato in season or any other vegetable that you like. It's the same thing with barley and other grains. It's really great to work with local and regional and traditional malt facilities, and especially to drink the beer that they're made with. So there's something interesting about these two malt facilities. Maltsters is Chris from the UK and Admiral from California. And they're going to tell us a little bit about what they do, in particular, why floor malting is so important, and then we're going to talk about a collaboration. So who wants to start telling me why floor malting is different, some of the traditions around it, and how, what Admiral's doing is new or old, and, all that stuff. Floor malting, it's sexy.
Go ahead, Ron.
Yeah, we chose to, at Admiral Maltings, when we opened, it was a very specific decision to do floor malting as opposed to more modern malting, which is in a solid-in box or a big cylinder, where the malt is turned pneumatically with giant sort of slow-moving augers and chilled, oxygenated, humidified air is forced up through the bottom, thereby accelerating the respiration or the growth of the barley kernel, and having it sprout a little more quickly and uniformly. Floor malting is a traditional. It's probably one of the very first ways that barley was ever malted. Now let's remember, barley you can't just use as a grain to make beer or to make whiskey. It's not like a grape that you can crush and all of a sudden ferment both the water and the sugars that are right in there, or an apple that you can press and ferment those juices. The starches in a grain seed, in particular in a barley seed, are incredibly complex and long-chained, and they need to be broken down, and they're broken down through this process we call malting. But malting is nothing more than a word for soaking, germinating, and then drying a seed. So that's what we do. We sprout seeds and we dry them, and that's what Crisp does. But once it's sprouted, then it unlocks. It makes a little packet of water-soluble sugars with enzymes that the brewer, depending on what the temperature of the water they put in, can activate these enzymes to chop those sugars up into really bite-sized pieces that the yeast can ferment. So floor malting, in contrast to the Saladin box or the more industrial, a little more forced malting, is where the grain is steeped and then it for about 2 days, and then it's spread. Once it's fully hydrated, it's just moist all the way through, and the enzymes can move around. Then we spread it around on the floor in just a little thin layer, 4 inches. It could be 6 inches. It could be a little less, depending on the depth. You're going to have different heat reactions. But in any case, you spread it out over the floor to germinate over a period of maybe 4 or 5 days. And in that process, you're breaking down the proteins and then pitting the starch granules. You're creating enzymes. You're basically making malt. And then in the last stage, in our situation, Crisp has a more traditional kiln, and it takes a little longer. But we have a kiln that can dry our malt in about 24 hours. And it doesn't just dry it. That is the lever that maltsters pull to get color and flavor in their malt. Just as you might toast your toast from light to medium to dark, or you might take sugar, put it in a pan, it could be white. You could caramelize it if you wanted to with heat. So heat, carbohydrates, proteins, moisture combined for a Maillard reaction, combined for hundreds of different flavor compounds. And that's how we finish the malting process in the kiln, creating these flavor compounds. We feel that on the floor, the way it grows, it's more gentle than in a Saladin box. It's just naturally germinating. The layer of CO2 on there is going to be much thicker because you're not having this air forced through it. And that may change in turn the microbiome on the seed, and there might be just micro changes that are teased out when you kiln it. And Crisp has done studies on this. David Griggs has, in that that if you do hedonic or just people's preference, same beer, same malt, same barley variety, same recipe, same hops, same yeast, everything the same, except one malt was floor malted, one not. People tend to prefer it. So we chose to do it both because of the tradition, the history, the flavor impact that we think it is something that's revered by brewers and distillers around the world. And so we chose to incorporate that into our business model, following the tradition and really imitating heavily, for example, how they do it at Crisp Maltings. They were just heroes. They still are to us as far as the tradition and knowledge of floor malting.
So if I'm into slow food, I could call this slow malt.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
could.
funny enough, we're working with a slow food organization here in the SF Bay Area, East Bay. They're going to be putting on an event down the street with St. George Spirits, and we're offering tours of our malt house as an add-on to the ticket for attendees. So it's definitely connected to slow food in many real ways.
They're celebrating grains, so there'll be bakers. There's going to be chefs making food with grain. There's the grain product that St. George has. There's the grain product that the breweries in Alameda have, and then of course we make that grain product that those brewers and distillers tend to use.
That's great. Hey, so Tim and Josh, you guys, let's get you in. So for Tim, how do you talk about Admiral malting and floor malting? And I'm also interested in some of the beers that are being made that you'd consider really showpieces for what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. This is Tim from Admiral Malting speaking now, and I recently joined Ron on the sales and marketing side with Admiral. I was a maltster on the production floors for 3.5 years, and so my perspective when I'm speaking to customers and partners, for collaborative projects about the malt comes from this perspective of having my boots in the grain bed every day, in my hands, and checking on the malt. So it was a very hands-on experience that when I found myself at Admiral. So I've just grown so attached to this ancient craft. So when I'm talking to people about it, a lot of the points that Ron brought up about what separates floor malt from pneumatic malt, I bring those up. We're talking about the microbiome, the microbes that are on the surface of the grain, and I'm talking about the CO2 blanket on the floor and how that affects maturation and germination of the grain, and how these effects get teased out in the kiln. And like he said, we're creating flavor by controlling temperature, time, and humidity in the kiln. But for me, one of the biggest things I talk about is our relationship with our farmers. And I know Chris has a similar relationship. We really would not be able to do what we do if we didn't have great relationships with our farmers. A lot of our Buddha 12 barley, one of our main varieties that we malt, comes from Esparto, California, in the Sacramento Valley, and it's farmed by Bob and Steven Shop, which are 4th and 5th generation barley farmers in Central California, who, we rely on them, and we incorporate them into all of our conversations and our marketing material and our sales pitches, because we want to reconnect our customers, our brewers and distillers with the farmers, and let consumers realize that this is an agricultural product. To address, which beers are standout, I happen to be sitting next door right now at Almanac Brewing. We share a building with Almanac, and they recently used this Hana collab Pils malt that we did with Crisp, and I'm drinking their Sandbox Keller Pils, and it's a perfect showcase for these kind of specialty heirloom malts. It's not covered up by too much hops. It's not covered up by too much yeast character. We are happy and proud to be making malts that fit every beer style, but when it comes to tasting the grain, we definitely have a lot of space on our board. So at our pub, we have a pub called The Rake that serves 20 different draft beers and about a dozen whiskeys, and we have 2 refrigerators full of bottles and cans available to go. And we definitely always leave enough space for our English style beers that highlight kind of the soft malty character, or like the more English bitter style beers. And then we always have several lagers that are not covered up too much by hop character. But that said, I think both Admiral and Crisp are making awesome malts that translate well into hoppy beers and more of the Belgian style yeast forward beers. But my recommendation, if you're in Northern California right now and you want to try Hana malt, I would say try Almanac's Sandbox Keller Pils. And if you're in Southern California, check out Firestone Walker. Their R&D brewery is called The Propagator. And Sam Tierney, the brewer there, invited myself and Colin, who's the sales and marketing director for Crisp, down for the brew day for their Hellas, and that was just packaged last weekend. So look for that Hellas, and if you're up here, check out the Keller Pils, and in general, look for your lagers and your English beers if you want to really understand what your base malts taste like.
Well, it's great that you started your way up, working the shovels, and I get the rake. So the rake is also shovel and rake the floor malting, right?
Exactly.
And then, Josh, just tell us a little bit more about what you do. So it says you're the North American tech for Crisp Malting. What does that mean?
Yeah, so I basically assist with our brewers and distiller partners in the U.S. with technical solutions, product development, recipe development, and just relationship management. But for those that don't know, Chris Malt, we're a UK based malted barley supplier. We've been making malted barley for 150 years. We've been floor malting for that entirety of 150 years. We still use our original floor maltings in Ryborough, England. I think when I talk to brewers about what we are and what we're about is we like to talk about heritage. And the Hana barley was barley that was used in the 1870s to brew the first pilsners, and it gave way from other varieties, more modern varieties. But we brought it back from about 10 seeds and took a few years to grow it back up to a couple acres, and then started floor malting it. And we were really excited to use this and partner up with Admiral Maltings on this. And
what's different about the Hana that what's another craft malty pilsner barley that people use, and how would you compare the Hana to something more typical?
Well, it is our lightest colored malt in our portfolio. Which it has this beautiful bread biscuit character that I think really shines in those lighter, easier drinking styles, these lagers and Czech pilsners. And it isn't quite as modified as modern varieties, I think. But floor malting, it gives you this exceptionally complex character. And with floor malting, I think I try to tell people that to floor malt, you have to do it by hand. And so when you think about malted barley, they can come from these big plants, these big facilities that do tons and tons a day. But for the floor malting, the Hana, you really have to do it by hand. And I think Admiral did an excellent job with this collaboration.
So did you send them the grain, and then they malted it and kilned it? Is that's how it worked?
Yep, exactly. We shipped a container full of the barley to them. When did that land, Ron? Was that January?
Yeah, right about then. Because we maybe later in January, we didn't really catch much for beer week, because really a lot of the beer started to come out in June, but something like that. I don't remember when when did it land?
Well, there was some conversation about getting it in a little earlier, and I remember there being some holdups. I don't think it landed even before beer week in February. The big thing is we wanted to make sure we had beers ready for our festival called It's the Malt. It was our first, it was our inaugural malt festival here at Admiral. And to be honest, I was skeptical that we were going to be able to get those beers in time, knowing that most of our customers were going to be brewing, properly lagered 6 to 8 week lagered beers. But miraculously, we still had, I believe it was a dozen of the 23 or so Hana beers that were made on draft at our festival.
That's amazing.
It was special.
And then before I go too far into just getting to know you guys, Ron, give us that intro. Let's talk about this collaborative process. So it's Chris from the UK and Admiral from California. You guys made a special collaboration. Malting across the pond, a transatlantic grain collaboration.
Exactly. No, it started basically just again, we always, they're floor maltsters. We learned a lot from them. We hang out with them. They're our colleagues. We were at a CBC probably about 3 CBCs ago, and Colin was there, and David Griggs was there, and he's the technical director for Chris Maltings, and Colin just was like, my God, brewers are collaborating left and right. Why shouldn't maltsters collaborate? Maybe we could start talking about some sort of collaboration. And that's really was the germ of it, was Colin coming up with that idea. And we just thought, well, that's a spectacular idea. I mean, we had visited a couple of times and intensely studied the process that Crisp was using. We designed our malting facility based in large part on that. We did some modern tweaks. We have a temperature controlled floor, a radiant cooled floor, because when things are germinating, they tend to heat up. And you know, a couple of things, you know, a kiln that's a little more higher powered fan, indirect fire, whatever. But by and large, we followed their processes. So we were just so keen to be able to be associated with and link up with that. They're very proud of heritage. They floor malt Chevalier, which was also grown in California, you know, century or so ago. They floor malt Hana. Also, they had already done that. So we just, I mean, it ended up becoming the first international floor malting collaboration ever. No one's ever done that to our knowledge. I mean, you know, so watch someone dig up some article from 1843, but I don't know. Yeah, we certainly don't know about it. And so, yeah, and it just was an opportunity to celebrate. You know, we're so aligned in number one, celebrating traditions, celebrating variety. And they work directly with their farmers. I mean, we both have this, I think, ethos. You know, this is certainly something Tim and I are pushing every day, that, you know, beer is barley, and malt's the soul of beer. It's you know, hops are the salt on the potato, but we're the potato, and we're just trying to reconnect, you know, that farmer and the maltster to the brewer, to the distiller. You know, let's connect. Let's, you know, and when you're talking about the floor maltings of either of our businesses, that's what we can do. That's very unique. Is we can make it small again.
Yeah, Ron. So back to this floor malting. Just tell us how Crisp Malt inspired you again. And I know it was established in 1870 in England.
That's about when I was born.
What you're doing? Yeah, I know. I thought you said 1843, but hey, yeah. So, how did that inspire you guys? You know, you're doing it the hard way, and I know Tim threw out his back or something. So,
well, I lost 60 pounds in 3 years, but now that I'm back on sales, I'm slowly gaining it back, having pints at my customers' breweries.
Yeah. Well, no, you know, so I had a brewery restaurant in San Francisco for over 27 years. It was called Thirsty Bear Brewing Company, and it kind of became a San Francisco institution, but we were very interested. I always have been interested in ingredients. In 2007, we became organic, and Crisp sold organic malts. You know, Crisp was just always one of those more revered craft malts that brewers could get. And so I actually used quite a bit of their malt when I was brewing beer, or when I was overseeing the brewery. And so it already was something that I had reverence for, or admiration for, or developed a taste for. So yeah, I mean, they just were known that. They also were one of the few places that you could get floor malt from. I mean, there were, you know, in England now, there's one, you know, there's a very, very old floor maltings. There's another one probably about a similar age. And that's really about it in England, you know, where you can get it from. I mean, Germany has a floor malting facility, but there's really, from an international commercial standpoint, there's probably about a half dozen floor maltsters that people can, at most, that you can get some from. Now in Scotland, there's some of the distilleries still have their own floor maltings, and they floor malt for the whiskey they make. But yeah, and so the inspiration came. I remember just a trip I took there when I had Thirsty Bear and was in the thick of that, and I wasn't even really thinking about opening our own malting facility. And then when I did start thinking about it, we went there again, and really, and they were just so welcoming and so open with sharing their passion, their knowledge for floor malting. So it was pretty cool. I really kind of thought about the idea because California has such a history of growing malting quality barley. We used to export it to England. In fact, the most important agricultural export from California between 1860 and 1940 was malting barley, or barley in general. I'm not positive it was in particular malting barley, but we exported it to England. Crisp has records of receiving, it's California barley. I've talked with David Griggs about that, and we happen to live right near that 4th, 5th generation farmers we're using. Their great grandparents would send barley to England, and so they stopped doing that for many years. Submarine warfare in World War II kind of wiped out the trade after the war with the massive surplus of petroleum-based products that we use for both fertilizers and fungicides and pesticides, all that. We stopped exporting it there. Maybe other value-added crops became important in California, but there was this history of growing barley in California. UC Davis developed one of the first malting barley variety styles from. They selected a landrace that the Spanish had brought here about 500 years ago. They brought a barley from North Africa. It was just called a North African, but it became a landrace here, and over many hundreds of years, it just acclimated and became. It was a 6-row. And when UC Davis, about 1900, they selected, I think, 200 different lines of this landrace, and then they chose the best selections, and they called it Atlas because they believed that the barley first came from the Atlas Mountains in Morocco. And so there's just this rich tradition here. And in 2010, I had an organic farmer called me up, someone, just from the Woodland area or whatever. Say, hey, I'll give you some barley, organic barley you could use in your, in your beer. And I'm like, well, there is this step called malting. But right then, the first craft malts of Colorado Maltings had been open for a year or two. And we actually sent the barley. It was a Metcalf barley that this farmer grew. And we sent it to Colorado, and he malted it and sent it back to him. It just lit a light bulb in my head that, hey, why not? All these breweries in California are, making, quote, California beer.
I don't know how many.
But the ingredients.
12 years ago.
Yeah.
Ron, 12 years ago for me, talking about, the steps from grain to malt to beer. About 12 years ago, a New York State farmer I knew messaged and said, hey, my farmer friend has X amount of this red fife wheat, and he wants to sell it to a brewery. So how do you talk to a farmer like that who's coming up for the first time and is interested in selling, their grain for malt? I know it's basic now, but what do you tell someone like that?
Well, that was the whole thing. Back then, we had to prove that concept, and then it becomes like, sure, you can. There's ways to grow malting barley. Number one, you can't just dump fertilizer on it and get the biggest yield you have, because then the protein goes through the roof, and you have too high enzymatic content, too high FAN, too high nitrogen. You have all these things that ultimately aren't what brewers prefer. So number one, they have to know how to grow it, like how much to seed, how to harvest it, so they're not skinning and breaking the kernels. We want more. We want the kernel completely intact. If we knock off the germ, or if we knock off too much of it, then mold can get into it and all that. And so there's both the way it's grown, but then it's almost like a hop person. You can't just throw hops in the ground. You need trestles, and then you're going to need kilns to dry it and all that. And it's the same thing with malting. So really, California farmers, they could have. There were people up in Klamath Basin, Tule Lake, all that. They would export to the Maltings, I guess, up in RAR and stuff up in Vancouver, or Country Malt up there. But absent growing massive amounts, you need a local maltster. It's the recreation of a local economy. In other words, a local agricultural economy that supports beer ingredients. And it starts with the farmer, but you need that maltster, and you need the brewers or the distillers. And then all of a sudden, you're out of that. You have a different kind of supply line that could be more resilient in times of economic disruption, because it's all right there.
Definitely, I'm convinced. Yeah, let's go back to Josh. Josh, you're working with a lot of brewers. Do you also work with distillers too?
Yeah, I think with the evolution of American single malt, actually, to take a step back, single malt whiskey in Scotland is about 50% of our total business portfolio. It's an industry that we've worked in for a very long time. We have maltings in England and Scotland, as well as Germany and Poland, but we make malted barley in Scotland specifically for whiskey. And now with the evolution of American single malt, this is a category that we as a company and myself personally are very excited about. And we're hoping to expand our relationships with distillers here, because we think we make a pot still malt that has very high extract, low protein, really great character, and is easy to, great friability. It's easy to mash in and run off and hit all your metrics. So we do have a handful of excellent partners in the States. I think as the American single malt kind of grows more and more, as soon as it gets designation by the TTB, I really think there's a lot of potential for that category to grow in the States. And, being 100% malted barley product, we love that. And we also want to help, you help the category evolve as things move along.
Tim, what about Admiral? Or you're selling to distillers as well as brewers?
Yeah, so my background is definitely beer heavy, as is Ron and our other co-owner, co-founder Dave McLean. Coming from beer backgrounds, it's been just really in the last year and a half that we've really realized that the potential for us to more in a deeper way work with craft distillers. There's some amazing whiskey and bourbon being made at our pub. We are selling pours on site, as well as actually bottles available to go from our pub of the spirit producers that we work with. And we recently developed a malt that was a play off of our Gallagher's Best. So Gallagher's Best is our Butter 12 barley, kilned kind of in a way reminiscent to an English style pale malt, kind of our homage to Maris Otter, which is, obviously a very well-known, typically floor malted variety from the UK. So we had a customer who he said, I really like the kind of enzymes available and the flavors available in the Gallagher's Best, but I want a little bit more kiln character, a little bit more toast, a little bit more kind of caramelization, similar to our Pacific Victor, which is kind of our Vienna style malt. So his name's Gian, and he works with Ruins Distilling in American Canyon, and we actually developed Gian's Best. So it was a play on Gallagher's Best. So we're actually, we're actively working with these distillers to create the right product for them. We also recently started floor malting corn, which is a new product for us. We've done a yellow dent corn grown in California, and we recently floor malted a red corn. It's called Floriani, which was originally grown by Native Americans in the Northeast, and it was later taken to Europe and popularized for the use of polenta, and it's now made its way back to North America. And we are having it grown in the Sacramento Valley, and we we're floor malting it. We're starting to see, we have some brewers using the corn for making American cream ales and other styles, rustic lagers, American lagers. But really, these products were kind of developed with distillers in mind and creating bourbon. So we're definitely actively working on creating products that are designed for our distiller customers. But I think Ron probably has a little bit more to say. He's definitely jumped in the deep end on distilling. So Ron, I'd like to hear your thoughts.
It's an amazing category. It's an amazing vehicle to showcase basically terroir. I mean, I think the great thing, there's a couple things that make distillers so interesting. I mean, number one, I love a good whiskey, especially a single malt, but I've really become quite fond of bourbons. I have some samples I'm looking at right now that we're done with our first malted, a yellow dent corn, not this red Floriani, but the complexity of flavor that the malted corn adds, without having to have gone through the barrel aging, but just its interaction within the barrel is just really special. But one thing about distillers is that, number one, to make a 54-gallon barrel of whiskey, they use about 1,100 pounds of malt instead of a brewer that might use 50 pounds of malt for 50 gallons. And then, so number one, they use a lot, so they can be very appealing to maltsters in that way. But number two, the bottles tend to cost more, and so they are more, whether their choices on labels, their choices on the kind of barrel they use, their choices on the kind of bottle that they put it in. All these things could have more of a price impact than the differential in buying an ultra premium malt. And fortunate or unfortunate, but by the time we pay our farmers properly and the labor to make it, and in an urban environment, our factory is not out in the middle of nowhere. Our malts are quite expensive, and so, but a distiller can absorb that cost much more easily than a brewer that's competing for the price of a pint and all that. Also, I think that distillers have embraced a teeny bit more, perhaps, the idea of terroir than brewers. Brewers have gotten used to a long time, where there was a good chunk of time where malt was often seen as a source of sugar as much as anything else. And any flavor color they got out of it was really going to be in just a few specialty malts, or from the hops, which took center stage and all that. But the distillers are definitely a little bit more interested in, seemingly, just anecdotally, I don't have any data for this, in terroir, in more experimentation, more interesting different grains and things like that. And that's an odd thing to come out of my mouth, because I think some of the most experimental group of people in American artisan craft have to be brewers. So but I think everyone, even within some of the most creative bodies, sometimes people fall into very set ways. And I think having a very set amount of extract that you get and a very set reaction, of enzymatic power and all that was, people got used to it, not thinking so much about their malt. And maybe just distillers were initially, or have been, a little more open. I think this is all fluid. This is all changing. It all depends on the approach of the brewer or the distiller. But I'm having a lot of fun working with the distillers, for sure.
No, that's great. So Ron, Josh, and Tim, tell me about an aha moment you had when you were drinking a beer that was made with craft malt, and maybe a thing that's different about that than just drinking a regular beer.
I love
flavors or experience.
I'd love to just to answer your question, and also kind of stay on the subject of whiskey, which is something, American whiskey is something I've been thinking a lot about lately. American whiskey tends to be bourbon, so it's a lot of corn, maybe only be 10% barley, and it's going to be put in these brand new oak barrels. So it's going to be very intensely flavored by the wood. You don't really taste the grain in a lot of cases. I think with some of the American single malts, there was two at the Rake that I tried that I loved that were made with Admiral Maltings, floor malted, and they were 100% malted barley, and you could really taste the grain character, and it wasn't just barrel driven. And I think that's where distillers are really going to start to come around to these very interesting character that you get from floor malting. Almost sometimes subtle nuance that I think carries through to that final product. Maybe Tim, remember the name of that single malt you have at the Rake?
Yeah, so I believe that when you were here, it was the Hinter House. I think it was Hinter House, which they're in Arnold, California. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure they just won a bunch of awards too.
Yeah, they're fantastic. On the question from Jimmy, as far as like that aha moment, to kind of tell the story of how I ended up at Admiral, I was doing beer sales for a few years with a large Northern California brewery, and I had been a tour guide before that. They got bought by a large company, and I decided I wanted to go somewhere else. So I was doing sales for a small cider startup, and I had done great for them. But overnight, when COVID hit, all of my draft accounts disappeared, and I needed to find something. And I had sold some cider to the Rake, our pub at Admiral, and I have known Ron. I think I remember meeting Ron 10 years ago. I don't know if Ron remembers meeting me, but he's met a lot of people in beer. Most of us after having several beers, you meet a lot of people. So I don't expect him to remember meeting me, but Thirsty Bear was indeed a impactful, influential place for a young brewer in the San Francisco area. So I had his number, and I said, "Hey, Ron, I'd like to learn the craft." Actually, I said I'd like to get a job, and he said, "Oh, at the Rake, you want to pour beer?" I was like, "No, I want to actually learn the craft." And he said, "Are you sure about that? Do you know what you're getting into?" And I said, "No, I don't know what I'm getting into, but I'm sure I want to do it." So, as I said, I wasn't joking when I said I lost 60 pounds over 3 years shoveling grain. And the first 3 months, I definitely thought I was going to quit. It was just so much work. Like Josh said, like floor malt is by hand, and it's not mechanized. I mean, yes, we have some conveyor belts that help move the malts around the place, but it's a lot of it is us shoveling 8 to 10 ton batches. So at the end of the day, we walk over to the Rake and we have a pint. And it was, for me and most of the maltsters, Old Kaz Brewing in Rohnert Park has a beer called Bukovany Pivo. It's their Czech pills that originally was all floor malt or Pils malt. I'm not sure if it was their floor malt, but it was Pils malt from another company that they started blending us in, and very quickly they started blending more of us in. They went from 100% this European German malt to 100% our malt, and that beer we used to say like #Pivo till it's gone. Bukovany Pivo is the name of the beer. So because it was the maltster favorite. That was the aha moment for me, was drinking so many different Pilsners at that point in my craft beer career, but drinking that one and hearing the story of like these brewers had used, premium European malt, and you then started blending ours in and very quickly switched that it spoke to me. And ever since then, whenever I go, traveling out of state or out of country for my own brewing adventures, I always bring a 4-pack of that when I can. And usually I'll be hanging out with other brewers because I'm brewing beers abroad or whatever, and they'll say, "Oh, they've heard of this brewery, they've heard of that brewery, but maybe they haven't heard of this really special NorCal brewery using our malt, and they've been winning a lot of awards with beers made with our malt." And I always love sharing that one. So that was definitely my aha moment.
Tim, just tell me, so what's the taste difference?
So for me, there's something that what I'll do is I'll kind of speak on it from the perspective of what my buddy Sebastian Sauer from Freigeist Brewing in Germany told me when he visited recently. We brewed a beer together at Olfactory Brewing, which is Phil Emerson is the head brewer there, and he uses our malts. I think 95+% of his malt purchases are from us. We brewed a rye lager there, but when I'm talking to German brewers like Sebastian, a lot of malts are those pneumatic malts are over modified. They don't have that kind of microbiome growing on. It's not the right environment. So when I'm giving the tour of the malt house, what I tell people is, you've heard about some of the best lagers in the world being open fermentation, like open primary fermentation before they go to the lager tank. Or you hear about Saison yeast from like Saison DuPont needs to be open primaried first because it creates the least amount of stress on the cell walls of the yeast. In my opinion, the microbiome on the floor malt in this thin 3-inch deep layer on the floor is the right environment for this microbiome to create flavor compounds that are expressed in the kiln. And as somebody who was hands-on with the malt, and I've known all the maltsters that have come and gone from our staff, like we are really hands-on, and we're tasting and smelling and looking at the malt every day, multiple times a day, versus malt that's just sitting in these big stainless vessels. There's something to be said for this very hands-on approach and this care that we take. And I think that it creates this complexity. And Sebastian from Germany says like this breadiness. If we want to just get down to flavor descriptors, there's these, it's slightly less modified. It's got more flavor complexity and depth, but specifically this kind of body and breadiness that you just can't get from pneumatic malt, in my opinion.
It takes me back. I'm ready for some of that. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back in a few minutes on Beer Sessions Radio.
Whether you're a chef or just love going to restaurants, you know the best ingredients are everything, especially when it comes to beef. In Northern Australia, there's a different approach to raising high-quality beef. Westholme, based in Queensland and Northern Territory, is working with the land to create nature-led Australian Wagyu. Westholme stewards 16 million acres of rangeland guided by their natural ecosystem. They're led by a belief that if they balance the needs of their cattle with the needs of the environment, both can thrive. Westholme's team of rangeland experts and nature managers use a variety of tools to monitor and respond to the welfare of the environment, like satellites that assess grass health and on-the-ground research. Cattle are happier when they have the freedom to forage and explore, so Westholme ensures that they can roam wild, foraging at will for the first 2 to 3 years of their lives. Their cows graze on native grasses like Mitchell grass, which is only found in Australia, along with dozens of other plants, herbs, and seasonal legumes. The result is a high-quality Wagyu beef that reflects the terroir of Northern Australia and a flavor suited to complement any cuisine. Westholme believes that when nature leads, flavor follows. Learn more at westholme.com.
Hey, welcome back to Beer Sessions Radio on Heritage Radio Network. It's our 15th year. Support us, become a member at Heritage Radio Network. So we're talking about some specialty floor malted craft malts, and I'm really ready for a beer. So Tim, you're talking about readiness and less modified. Who wants to talk about the old tradition, from England that crisp was 1870, and how is Admiral's building on that? Is just using new technology? What's the difference in the floor malting between the two operations?
Yeah, I've been to both. I might as well say something about it. Okay, malt probably arrives similarly. We have some silos, we have super sacks, that sort of thing. Super sacks being giant bags that can hold a ton at a time, and silos, everyone I think knows what that is. And it probably gets to our steep tank somewhat similarly. Steep tank is where we're going to start the process. We're going to wake up the barley. We'll use different conveying systems. We use a puck and chains called chain bay. I've seen something similar for sure at Crisp. And then they, as I recall, they had a iron, they flat, square. The steep tanks now may be cylindrical. I forget if they've changed them or not. I've actually been to several places, and so I may be a little confused in my head. Josh can take that. But we have a pretty modern cylindrical, conical steep tank with valves that aerate it from the bottom. Josh, do you remember what kind of steep tanks you have? You don't still have the old square iron steep tanks.
I'm not sure how old they are, but they didn't look new. I'll tell you that.
Okay. So they might, we might have a little more as that aeration, which basically just helps the steep along, because if there's oxygen in the water, then the barley can respire better. And then we kind of get it onto the floor in the exact same way. There's a type of, I'll call it a wheelbarrow, but it's called a bobby barrel, B-O-B-Y or B-O-B-I, I forget which. But Bobby was an engineering firm in England in the 1700s. And they had developed this almost like a wheelbarrow where it rather than, there's still two wheels on it, but there's a shaft. It's a perfectly even-sided container with a shaft that goes perfectly in the middle, so that the what holds the malt in there is perfectly balanced. And with these giant wheels, we can maneuver it very easily. You can tip it very easily because it just takes a little weight to a little effort to up it, turn it upside down. But ours was designed exactly like what they were using in Crisp. We had rakes designed in the beginning that were very similar to the kind of rakes to turn the malt that were designed in Crisp. We saw that they would get the malt off the floor by plowing it, by literally having a plow. That it's sort of a curved plow that with a flat bottom. We have some high density plastic on ours. Ours are made from stainless steel. They're probably a little more modern pieces of equipment, but we did the same thing using a winch that would pull this plow, and so we would just guide it, stand behind it and guide it to push the malt off the floor onto a conveyor. And that's exactly how they did it at Crisp. And then it would be conveyed to the kiln. And at Crisp Maltings, it goes up an elevator to the attic kiln, because there they have basically a direct fire kiln that's I think it's still gas jets, but they've had coal, they've had all sorts of different things, but it heats and it goes up sort of in this attic, and it percolates through the floor, and it takes a couple days at least to dry it there. Whereas but once it gets to the attic, once it gets to the kiln, they have this thing called a jet slinger, and it's basically, think of a snow blower or a pitching machine that pitches malt instead of balls. And they use that to spread the malt around. It sort of sprays it around, or basically ejects it very fastly, very, very quickly, and so that it can evenly be spread on the floor of the kiln. And we literally had our own engineering firm just copy something almost exactly like that here for ours. We call it a jet slinger, and it shoots the malt into the kiln that we have. So all that it was done virtually, the exact same kind of thing, rather than opening and closing windows to adjust the temperature on the malt floor. We have PEX tubing going in the concrete, and it's got a glycol in it, and so we can chill the floor. Germination is an exothermic reaction. It creates heat, just like fermentation does in a fermentation. And so, fermenters are glycol jacketed. We have tubes running in the floor that are chilled. We have a more temperate climate here in Alameda, so we don't have as cold a winters or as hot a summers, and that helps a little bit with temperature control too. But between the floor and doing that, so the essential components are really very similar to them. But yeah, we might have a newer conveyor system. We might have better, I don't know, but a newer compressed air being blown through these nozzles at the bottom of our steep tanks. And then we also have a fan that goes reverse and sucks air through it. Because you basically, when you're soaking the grain, you steep it, you let it soak, then you drain out all the water and just let it sit there while the moisture in the seed kind of equilibrates. And that's called the dry steep. There's a wet steep and a dry steep. And the dry phase, we actually have these fans that pull air through the bed, and that's probably a little more modern touch as well. So there's a few of these modern touches, but the essentials are the same.
That's great, Ron. Thank you. And then Josh, I know you were about to say something before.
Ron's much more of an expert on this subject than I am. I've seen our floor maltings in England, but when I was there, they were down for maintenance. So Ron's actually seen them in action. I would like to say though that I think what Admiral has done is really encapsulated this heritage, this legacy of producing malted barley, and then applied some modern touches to not only make it more cost effective and efficient, but to also give you a more consistent, higher quality product, or as high, as consistent and as high quality as possible. I think one of the coolest things, if you ever get the chance to tour their facility, is the glycol piping they have through the flooring, which I thought was interesting. And that giant snowblower they have is awesome.
Yeah. Well, you guys got one of those up in the attic kiln at Crisp. It's yours is a little older than ours.
The next time I go to HQ to tour, I'm gonna get 3 days of actually working the floors. But they were down for maintenance when I was there last time.
That's fantastic. Fantastic.
Well, listen, you guys are great. It's really interesting. I can't wait to try. Hopefully, I can try that Almanac Sandbox Pills with the Hannah malt. The one. So the second part of this collaboration, as we wrap it up, is that you guys are going to send the Buddha 12 to England. So, what's the Buddha 12? Give me the quick Buddha 12 101.
Well,
and where did it come from?
Sure, it's a blend of barley lines. Some of it came from like this. I think it's called CMIT. It's major barley and grain world seed bank, in Mexico and all that. And some came from there. Some actually came from a germplasm that Dr. Pat Hayes, he was the head of the Flavor Project and the barley breeding program at Oregon State University for decades until he just retired this year. But he even had some full pint that went into that. But this Dr. Lynn Gallagher, he was a barley breeder for decades at UC Davis, and he was sort of this lone wolf in that he, no one was malting. We are the first, to my knowledge, and again, no one's ever told me or shown me anything different, but we were the first barley malting facility to open since Prohibition in California. So there were some older, bigger ones. I think one that had closed in LA, and Bauer and Schweitzer had closed in like 1980, 81 in San Francisco. That was from the 1800s. But essentially those had been legacy. But we were the first ones to open. And this guy, Dr. Lynn Gallagher, had been at UC Davis. I was introduced to him through my old mentor, the former Anheuser-Busch endowed professor at UC Davis, Dr. Michael Lewis. And he introduced me to Lynn Gallagher when I told Dr. Lewis that we wanted to, I was interested in doing this project. And Lynn had been just, collecting germplasms, like I said, from Mexico, from Dr. Hayes and all this. And he was breeding something. In California, there was a virus called yellow dwarf virus, and it had really decimated the barley crop here. And we were always told, beware if you use these North American two-row varieties or even these European two-row varieties, eventually they're going to succumb to yellow dwarf virus and or striped rust. Those were the two sort of pathogens that were had been, somehow reared their ugly head in California. So he was breeding it to be resistant to yellow dwarf virus, and to the best, not as much, but a little bit so to striped rust. There's been some improvements on that. So he had been working 10 plus years on doing this. Maybe he was hoping that Budweiser and Fairfield or something would pick it up. But it was our interest that completely ignited this. He published a paper through our use of it and introduced this new variety to the world. And we've been really happy with it. We've tried other varieties that have been related to it, but there's some things that make it a little difficult to malt, but there's other things, including its flavor, that make it really special. And, you talk about that aha moment before. That ability to have a barley that's been grown in the same fairly small region, the same variety, not blended with other varieties, not blended with other regions, far away, allows this, that's what it tastes like here. And I actually felt that when I tried that Hana that Chris grew. I'm sure it was from one farm and one region, really small. And it just, wow, to taste that compared to our barley, it was just eye-opening, to see that slight but significant difference. So, yeah.
Well, listen, this has been a great intro. It's nice to hear you guys talk about this, go a little deeper into what craft malting is. And thanks so much, Tim, Josh, and Ron, for joining me here on Heritage Radio Network. I'd have you sign off, but I think we talked a lot, and I'm still processing what floor malting is, but I know it when I taste it, right?
That's for sure.
Thanks so much, guys. Big shout out to our engineer, Armin Spengen. Thanks so much, guys. We'll catch you next time on Beer Sessions Radio. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Jimmy.
Thank you, Jimmy.
Beer Sessions Radio is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network. Food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe.
Ever wonder what's hot in the baking world right now? It's not even that complicated. You get store-bought croissants, cut them open, shove in some store-bought cookie dough, and that's it.
Hi everyone, I'm Gemma Stafford, professional chef, cookbook author, and creator of Bigger Bolder Baking.
Welcome to Need to Know, your go-to podcast for everything baking entertainment. From the latest trends,
this is the viral scrambled pancake trend.
To the tips and tricks you crave.
We discovered that if you take apple peels, toss them in a little cinnamon and sugar, and bake them for about an hour in the oven, you get a really lovely treat.
Plus exclusive interviews with baking pros.
Hey, it's Liz from the Sugar Geek Show. Thanks for having me, Gemma.
We've even got the Bold Baking Hotline to answer all of your baking queries and questions.
Is a Dutch oven really necessary for baking bread, and what difference does it make?
Yes, I think we probably would agree on that, do we, Oni?
Yeah,
oh, good. So join us every Sunday for your new weekly baking ritual. It's everything you need, that's KNEAD, to know.